On the surface, open world games are quantity over quality thing, where you have million things to do but few, if any, show the same level of care and craftsmanship you would find in smaller works like in linear games. Most content in open world games is bluntly mediocre and won't hold up on its own. But a good open world game is more than sum of its parts. The freedom is the key here. When you are given a broad array of choice on how to play the game and what to do at any given time, and all of this feels rewarding to engage with. You can pick the one you most likely feel at any moment and have fun doing it. And then when you get tired, you can switch over to something else and ignore anything you don't care for. These experiences, worth little on their own, are elevated by their integration with the broader experience curated by the players. Elden Ring falls short of these ideals in many ways. It carries over far too many sensibilities from Dark Souls games, which are far smaller and more directed experience, and plops them down in an open world setting with minimal consideration as to how well they would fit, often limiting your meaningfully viable options. Like in traversal, there are often very few limited options as to how to get from point A to point B. Going from Limgrave to Kalit, for example, there are 4 available routes, these being normal path by smoldering church, the chest traps the chest traps takes you into the mine, the teleporters in the bestial sanctum, the path that goes to Sophia's river. It might sound like plenty, but my point here is that all 4 of these are strictly delineated. It's not possible to get creative and access Kalit in some other ways. The same holds true in many other areas. I know there are only 3 ways to get from Atlas Plateau. For instance, 2 of these 3 are going from Lower Limgrave to Stormhill, but this has so much of the choke points which forces you down a certain path when you're trying to go somewhere else. All this is facilitated by the use of verticality to an insurmountable obstacles. There is no climbing in the game, no glider to survive a massive jump or cross a large gap. It's closer to a bigger, more diffuse version of Dark Souls map than it is a proper open world. The idea seems to be that player will be mostly using fast travels anyway, and rarely if you are ever going to go back to old areas for anything other than quick visit, which is how it went in Dark Souls. So why bother having more options that player won't ever take? Most of the stuff to do in Elden Ring becomes disappointing and tedious to engage with before long, not because of its quality, but because of the game's reward structure. There are millions of builds and playstyles in this game, which is commendable, but it means that majority of the items you will find will be completely useless because it won't fit your builds. It is not so bad in the early games when most people are still figure out the builds they want and pick every item, and there are still some potential paths to follow. But once your build starts to solidify, which usually happens around Liurnia, the side content becomes more and more of a chore. It's not exciting to find another incantations that I can't use as a strength character, another cookbook to craft more consumables that I don't want, or another spirit that I will never summon because it's completely outclassed by the one I'm currently using. At the same time, some builds are crucial to your progress, or at the least immensely useful to you. Most of these items are unique and meaning each can only be found in specific areas or after beating one specific challenge. If you don't know beforehand where to find them, your best bet is to explore everything you come across and hope for the best. This means spending many hours on mediocre content which gives minimal reward, all that to find out that 5 caves that are genuinely rewarding. And if you do know where they are or use guides to find them, you are most likely going down a strict checklist to get them all the items you need. Here again, the game is following the footsteps of Dark Souls, but misses the fact that in those games, you find most of the items while progressing normally through the game. A useless item was less of a disappointment since you don't have to go through far down on your way out. And useful items were found in abundance just by doing some things you would do anyways, because it is a linear game. The useless loot problem arises in large part from Elden Rings from having too rigid stacked requirements for builds. Suppose there are no stat requirements and you would immediately equip any new items you grab to see how you like it. Getting a new incantations or heavy weapons or whatever at the end of the mini dungeon would feel like a huge waste of time and effort. All in all, while I don't think the implementation of the open world is terrible, it's still a disappointment. And in hindsight, probably the biggest reason why I dropped every subsequent playthrough so early in the game, despite constantly finding Limgrave decently fun. If FromSoft ever tried to make another open world game, I really hope they revamp all the design choices instead of directly copying from Dark Souls again. The two core elements of the open world games are the aspect of exploration and player choices in terms of where to go and what to do next. Elden Ring takes the same approach to open world as Breath of the Wild, which is a big emphasis on exploring a large world with lots to find and discover. The only problem is that you can't explore something twice. Breath of the Wild has lots to see, climb and interact with, but it is clearly not designed to play it much more than once. The combat is not very deep, most enemies can easily be exploited, and most puzzles are easy if you already know the solution. As much as I love Breath of the Wild to bits, I got incredibly bored trying to replay the game, as the actual hands-on content of clearing the shrines and beating the dungeons doesn't offer much in terms of skill or player expressions, outside of the first aha moment of trying to figure out what to do. Elden Ring feels the same way. in that there are lots to discover and explore, but a lot of it is just uninteresting or not much worth of effort in return in subsequent playthroughs. The catacomb and mini dungeons are fun, exciting discovery for the first time you stumble upon them. But on your second playthrough, you probably won't care much to just rush through things, most of them to get the spells and stuffs you want for your characters. On repeat playthroughs, you most likely will be focusing on legacy dungeons. But compared to previous games, these can be quite weak. Most are similar in aesthetics, being in castles or palaces are usually pretty short and can be breezed through very quickly. This works great alongside the rest of the map, but not so well when it comes to focus of a playthrough. The ultimate problem with all of this lies in the difference between the design of a game like Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring. Elden Ring's gameplay formula is essentially Dark Souls formula. It is designed with multiple playthroughs in mind. Bosses are fun to fight and draws out best element of the Souls engaging combat system, but can only be fought once when you play through the game again. Summons are fun, but if you level up too far, you most likely won't have luck summoning for earlier areas. NPC questlines are interesting but incredibly hard to follow through naturally and can easily be locked out for playthroughs because you did something without realizing it. Respecs, while generous, are limited, meaning you will reach a point where you will have to do new runs to try out new builds. Elden Ring is a game designed to be played multiple times, just like Dark Souls, but ultimately the world it sets isn't very well suited to this. It's a great world and a blast to explore, but having exploration be the main draw for this world is at conflicts with the Elden Ring's replayability centric designs. Also consider that the gameplay of Elden Ring isn't very well suited to exploration either. Areas can be cool to look at and the loots can be fun to collect, but outside of the combat the game does not offer much, as Dark Souls isn't really intended to offer much besides fighting and dungeon crawling. Compared to Zelda games where you can climb terrains, glide and interact with the physics and temperature, use your slate abilities to play with your surroundings, the world of Zelda is far better suited to the gameplay it provides. In Elden Ring, there is little point in clearing out dungeons if your loot at the end isn't worth it, since you will be mostly fighting the same enemies as any other dungeons anyways. Don't get me wrong, I am incredibly impressed with the size and the scope of Elden Ring's world. FromSoftware has done an amazing job realizing the feeling of exploring a large and rich world full of secrets and discoveries. But I just don't think this kind of world is good approach to the Souls formula, at least not at the cost of smaller, fewer legacy dungeons and areas. I do think the open world can be great for these kinds of games, especially with the freedom of choices. Being able to tackle areas at any order at your pace is great, and feels like a major expansion to the designs of Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1. However, those games retained the focus on sprawling levels full of interesting enemies and engaging terrains. Elden Ring is focused more on large world to explore rather than fun levels to fight against. Stormvale and Lucaria and especially Lindale are all great areas, but I find they often feel a bit short and don't offer much in terms of aesthetics outside of different flavors of castles. Again, this works well when taken alongside the rest of the world, but if you have already explored the world in your first run, it is very hard to find any reason to spend much time mindlessly running around outside of the dungeons. That's it for today's video. Thanks for watching.